They weren't just going to hang me. Oh no. What the good people of Copper Ridge had planned for me was so much worse. I sat there on the dirt floor of that tiny jail cell, listening. The walls were thin, you see. Thin enough to hear every word from the town hall meeting next door. Thin enough to hear them deciding my fate. My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and 3 years ago, I came to this dusty corner of the world with a teaching certificate and a pocket full of hope. I thought I could make a difference. Now my dress was torn, my spirit was bruised, and my stomach was empty. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man whose face was a roadmap of regret, slid a tin plate of cold beans through the bars. He couldn't even look at me. "Council's meeting tonight," he mumbled, "to decide your situation." I knew what that meant. In a town like Copper Ridge, a situation was something to be disposed of, quietly and quickly. And my situation had started with a boy. Marcus Wade, barely 18 with his father's money and a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. He'd linger after my lessons, his questions about literature just a flimsy excuse to get closer. I kept my distance. I was a teacher, for goodness sake. Professional. But when a boy like Marcus doesn't get what he wants, admiration sours into something rotten. The accusation came like a rattlesnake strike on a quiet Tuesday morning. He claimed I'd made advances. Me, a desperate spinster, he'd called me. And in a town where his father, Harold Wade, owned the bank, the general store, and the mortgage on nearly every soul, Marcus's word was gospel. My life unraveled thread by thread. First, the schoolhouse doors were barred to me. Then, every job in town mysteriously dried up. The same women who'd invited me to quilting circles would now cross the street, clutching their children's hands, their whispers following me like a plague. "Shameful," they'd hiss, "taking advantage of that poor boy." The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I'd dedicated my life to shaping young minds, and now I was being destroyed by the lies of one. Desperation has a taste. It tastes like 3 days of gnawing hunger. My savings were gone. The landlord was pounding on my door. So I did something I never thought I would do. I saw a loaf of bread, a fresh, warm loaf cooling on Baker Wilson's windowsill. It was worth maybe 15 cents, and I took it. That single act sealed my doom. "Thieving on top of everything else," Mayor Richards had declared, his voice booming with false righteousness. "This woman is a danger to our community's moral fiber." So here I was, jailed for a loaf of bread, but condemned by a lie. As the evening shadows stretched across my cell, the voices from the town hall grew louder, more agitated. I pressed my ear to the rough wooden wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Burden on the community," someone grumbled. "Waste of resources," said another. Then Harold Wade's voice cut through the murmur, sharp and cold as a winter morning. "Gentlemen, keeping her in that cell costs money. Money this town doesn't have. She'll just be released eventually to cause more trouble." A hush fell over the room. I could feel the tension, even through the wall. "I say we solve two problems at once," Wade continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I held my breath, straining to hear. "The Apache raids have been costly," Wade said. "We lost 3 good men last month. That warrior they call the Blood Hunter, he's been particularly troublesome." My blood ran cold. I'd heard the stories. Every settler had. The Blood Hunter was a ghost, a phantom who moved through the desert without a sound, leaving nothing but terror in his wake. They said he was more demon than man. "What if," Wade proposed, his voice slick with terrible logic, "we offered a gesture of goodwill, a gift to the Apache, one woman, for the promise of peace?" A gasp. It was Dr. Franklin, the town's only physician. "Harold, you can't be serious. That's a human sacrifice." "Is it?" Wade shot back, his voice booming with authority. "Or is it justice? She corrupted our youth, stole from honest men. Let her serve some purpose for once. Everyone knows what the Apache do with their gifts. It would be a quick end to a long problem." The room erupted in a chaos of murmurs. Some protested, their voices thin and reedy. Others were thoughtful, You could hear the gears of self-preservation turning in their minds. Mayor Richards cleared his throat. The Blood Hunter, he has been quiet lately. It might work. It might buy us some time. You're talking about feeding a woman to wolves, Dr. Franklin cried, his voice strained with horror. I'm talking about protecting this community, Wade thundered. That woman in there is a disease, and this is the cure. The debate raged, but I knew. I knew how it would end. These were not evil men, not all of them. They were frightened men, and frightened men will always choose the easy path, no matter how dark it is. I sank to my knees, the cold of the floor seeping into my bones, the weight of their words crushing me. They were going to give me to him. They were going to trade my life for a ghost of a chance at safety. An hour later, the jingle of keys echoed down the hall. Sheriff Bradley stood before my cell, his face as pale as a corpse. He couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell, he whispered, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the lock. The council's decided. Tomorrow morning, we make the exchange. An exchange? My voice was a ghost. With the Apache, he confirmed, finally looking at me, his eyes filled with a wretched mix of pity and shame. With the Blood Hunter. They believe it's for the greater good. The greater good. I stared at the sheriff, at this man sworn to uphold the law, and I saw nothing but a coward. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, something else was hardening, something sharp and unbending. Anger. I see, I said, my voice quiet but steady. And when exactly does this greater good take place? Dawn, he said, locking the cell door behind him. At Devil's Canyon. He left me in the darkness. I listened to the sounds of the town that had condemned me. A dog barking, a badly played piano from the saloon, the lonely whistle of the wind. Tomorrow I would leave this place forever. But as I sat there, a strange thought came to me. The people of Copper Ridge thought they were sending me to my death. They thought they were giving me to a monster. But what if the monster wasn't the one waiting for me in the canyon? What if the real monsters were the ones who were locking the cage? Dawn arrived like a reluctant visitor, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. A mercy meal, they called it. Eggs and bacon, a feast compared to the cold beans from the night before. I ate every bite, tasting nothing, my mind 1,000 miles away. Time to go, Miss Mitchell. Sheriff Bradley's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Behind him stood Deputy Cole Hutchins, a boy barely older than Marcus Wade, his hand hovering nervously over his gun belt. They walked me through the back alleys of Copper Ridge, hiding their shame from the rising sun. But news travels fast in a small town. Faces peered from behind lace curtains. Mrs. Porter, the woman who had called my supposed actions shameful, stood on her porch, arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Should have thought of the consequences, she yelled, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. I kept my head held high. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The wagon ride to Devil's Canyon was a long, jolting hour. Mayor Richards sat across from me, his knuckles white as he clenched his hands. Harold Wade rode alongside on a fine black stallion, his face a mask of cold triumph. He was a king overseeing the exile of a troublesome peasant. You understand, this isn't personal, Miss Mitchell, the mayor said, his voice barely a whisper over the creak of the wagon wheels. It's simply practical. I looked at this man, this pillar of the community, who had once shaken my hand at a church social and praised my dedication. Practical, I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. Yes, I suppose trading human lives often is. He flinched and said nothing more for the rest of the journey. Devil's Canyon was well named. The wind howled through the towering red rock formations, creating an eerie symphony of moans and whispers, like the tormented souls of all the men who had died there before. It was a fitting stage for this final, grim act. A small group had gathered, the council members, the sheriff, and a few of Wade's cronies. All men, I noticed. The women of Copper Ridge would gossip about my fate, but they wouldn't dare witness it. They waited in a tense, suffocating silence. The only sounds were the nervous stamping of horses and the desert wind. "He'll come," Wade said, checking his pocket watch as if this were a business appointment. "Always punctual, this one." Fear radiated from them like heat from a blacksmith's forge. Whatever they knew, whatever stories they'd heard about this blood hunter, it was enough to make these hardened frontier men sweat in the cool morning air. The horses were the first to know. They grew restless, their ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Then came the sound. A single horse, its hoofbeats impossibly steady, impossibly quiet, moving across the treacherous terrain as if it were a paved road. He appeared at the mouth of the canyon, a silhouette against the rising sun, a shadow given form. Even from a distance, I could see why they feared him. He sat atop his paint horse not like a man, but like a part of the animal itself, a seamless union of flesh and spirit. His stillness was terrifying. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but the coiled, patient stillness of a predator. The men of Copper Ridge bunched together like frightened sheep. Harold Wade, ever the showman, stepped forward. "You came!" he called out, his voice strained. "We have what we discussed." The warrior rode closer, and I got my first clear look at him. He was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 30. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the morning light. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt, but a gun belt that looked like it had been taken from a cavalry officer was slung low on his hips. His gaze swept over the townsmen, assessing, dismissing. Then his eyes landed on me. For a heartbeat, something flickered in their depths. Something I couldn't decipher. He reined his horse to a stop 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to kill them all if he wanted to. When he spoke, his English was flawless, unaccented, and it sent a ripple of shock through the assembled men. "You bring me a woman?" It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Wade nodded eagerly. "As agreed, one woman for considerations. She's been nothing but trouble, theft, corruption of youth." He rattled off my supposed crimes like a grocer listing his wares. The warrior's eyes came back to me. I met his gaze. I would not look away. If this was to be my end, I would face it on my feet. "Get down," he commanded. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a landslide. Deputy Hutchins, looking like he was about to be sick, shuffled over to the wagon. "Come on, then," he muttered, helping me down. I stood in the red dust of Devil's Canyon, a piece of property being exchanged. The warrior swung down from his horse in one fluid, silent motion. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and moved with a grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He walked toward me slowly. The men of Copper Ridge tensed, their hands inching toward their pistols. He stopped right in front of me. I could smell the scent of sage and leather and the clean, dry air of the desert. "They tell you why you're here?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with something I couldn't place. "Curiosity, maybe?" I lifted my chin. "They tell me I'm payment for their peace of mind." A flicker of something, approval, crossed his face. "And you believe this is justice?" "I believe," I said, choosing my words with care, "that frightened people often make terrible choices." He studied me for a long, silent moment. Around us, the tension was a wire stretched to its breaking point. Harold Wade couldn't stand it. "Well?" he demanded. "Do we have an agreement or not?" The warrior turned to face the townsmen, and I saw them flinch. I saw a dozen armed men take an involuntary step backward from one unarmed man. "I take her," he said, his voice flat and final. Wade's relief was so thick you could taste it. "Excellent. Then our arrangement is renewed." "For now," the warrior said. The two words hung in the air, a quiet threat that silenced Wade completely. He returned to his horse and pulled a length of rope from his saddlebag. I braced myself. This was it. He was going to bind my hands, but he didn't. He walked back to me and simply handed me the end of the rope. "Hold this," he said. Confused, I did as he said. He mounted his horse, then gestured for me to walk beside him. As we started to move away, back toward the canyon's mouth, I heard Mayor Richards call out, his voice thin and pathetic. "Miss Mitchell, for what it's worth, I hope you find peace." I didn't look back. We walked in silence until the red walls of the canyon swallowed the sounds of Copper Ridge, until we were utterly alone in the vast, empty wilderness. The warrior reined in his horse and looked down at me. "You can let go of the rope now," he said. I looked down at my hands at the rough rope I was clutching like a lifeline. I didn't understand. He sighed, a sound of weary patience. "They needed to see you as my captive. Now they have." He paused, his dark eyes scanning my face. "The deal was not for a prisoner. The deal was to get you out of that town before Harold Wade decided a simple hanging was too merciful." My mind reeled. The entire exchange. The terrifying reputation. The rope. It was all a performance? A show? "What?" I whispered, the single word lost in the desert wind. "Wade didn't want you traded," the warrior said, his gaze as sharp and clear as a shard of obsidian. "He wanted you dead, and he paid me a great deal of money to make sure it happened out here, where no one would ever find the body." The ground seemed to fall away beneath my feet. This wasn't a trade for peace. This wasn't a punishment for stealing bread. This was a private execution, and the man they had hired to be my executioner was now my only hope for survival. The Arizona desert doesn't care about your hopes or your fears. It only cares about survival. As we moved away from Devil's Canyon, the last threads connecting me to my old life snapped. The lies, the whispers, the shame. It all blew away like dust on the wind. But a new, more immediate terror took its place. The man beside me, this blood hunter, was a hired killer, and I was his target. He rode in silence for the first hour. I walked, the rope still dangling from my hand, my mind racing. Why tell me the truth? Why not just do what Wade had paid him for? Was this some kind of cruel game? The sun climbed, beating down on us with a merciless intensity. My boots, made for a schoolhouse floor, were already rubbing my feet raw. "We'll stop soon," he said without looking at me. It was as if he could hear my thoughts. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Your breathing changed," he replied. "You're favoring your left foot." The observation was so simple, so direct, it stunned me. In Copper Ridge, I was a caricature. The spinster, the temptress, the thief. This man, this killer, saw me more clearly in 5 minutes than that entire town had in 3 years. We stopped in the meager shade of a barrel cactus. He dismounted and offered me a leather water bag. The water was warm, but it was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. "Drink more," he commanded, watching me with those unreadable eyes. "The desert will take everything you don't give it first." I drank again, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. "You could have killed me back there," I said, the words tumbling out. "Wade paid you to. Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a long time, scanning the horizon. When he finally answered, his voice was low, rough with some old pain. "Because Harold Wade is a liar, and I don't do business with liars." That was it. It didn't make any sense. "And another thing," he added, his gaze returning to me. "He said you corrupted his son. I've met Marcus Wade. That boy was born corrupt. Whatever you didn't do what they said you did." He pulled some dried meat and corn cakes from his saddlebag and offered me half. We ate in silence, the vast, empty landscape stretching out around us. The stories I'd heard painted this man as a monster, a savage who reveled in death. But the man sitting across from me was calm, observant, and had just shown me more decency than anyone in Copper Ridge. "They call you Blood Hunter," I said. "Names are weapons," he said simply. "Wade uses his money. I use fear. It is often more effective." "Is that your real name?" "My name is Noel," he said. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it felt like a key turning in a lock. We set off again, deeper and deeper into a world of rock and sun. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice cracking from the dryness. "Away from them," he said. "And then what?" "Then," he said, looking down at me from his horse, "you have a choice to make." A choice! The concept felt alien. For months, my life had been a series of things happening to me. I had been judged, condemned, and sold. The idea of making a choice, any choice, felt as vast and terrifying as the desert itself. "What choice?" Hannah pressed. "You can keep walking west," he said, gesturing with his chin. "In 2 days, You'll reach the stagecoach line to California. You can disappear. Start a new life where no one knows the name Cassandra Mitchell. It was a tempting offer, a clean slate, a chance to forget Copper Ridge ever existed. Or, I asked, a faint, humorless smile touched his lips. Or you can go back. I stopped walking. Go back? Why would I ever go back? Because, he said, his voice dropping, Harold Wade didn't just want you dead because of his son's lies. That was a convenience. He wanted you dead because of something you saw. I stared at him, my blood turning to ice despite the blistering heat. Something I saw? I don't know what you're talking about. Are you sure? Noelle's eyes bored into mine. Think back, teacher, the weeks before Marcus Wade made his accusation. Did you see anything you weren't supposed to see? Anything involving Harold Wade? My mind raced, frantically sifting through memories. The long afternoons in the schoolhouse, the quiet evenings in my boarding room. It was all a blur of fear and humiliation. No, I said, shaking my head. Nothing. Wade doesn't strike me as a man who pays a small fortune to cover up a teenage grudge, Nahuel said, his voice patient, insistent. There's more to this. There has to be. And that's when it hit me. A memory, buried under weeks of trauma. It wasn't in the schoolhouse. It was late one evening, a few weeks before the accusation. I was walking home. I'd taken a shortcut behind the livery stable. There was a wagon back there, half covered by a tarp. Two men were loading crates into it. One of them was Harold Wade. The other was a man I'd never seen before. A rough-looking man with a strange brand on his saddle. A coiled snake. But it was the crates that I remembered. One had slipped, its lid popping open for just a second. Inside, glinting in the moonlight, were rifles. Dozens of them. New repeating rifles. The kind the Army used. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Wade was a businessman. But now, why would he be dealing in Army rifles, in the dead of night, with a man who looked like an outlaw? I looked up at Nahuel, my eyes wide with a dawning horror. I saw something, I whispered. Rifles. Army rifles. Harold Wade was selling them. Nahuel's expression hardened. Who was he selling them to? I don't know, I said. Some man I'd never seen before. Did you see anything else? He pushed. A brand on the horses? Anything. A snake, I said, the image suddenly crystal clear. A coiled snake on the saddle. Nahuel went still, utterly, deathly still. The change that came over him was terrifying. The calm, observant man was gone, replaced by the predator I'd first seen in the canyon. What is it? I asked, my voice trembling. What does that brand mean? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fury in his eyes. A cold, ancient rage that seemed to burn from the very depths of his soul. It means, he said, his voice a low growl, that Harold Wade isn't just selling guns. He's selling them to the renegades who murdered my family. The world tilted on its axis. The story I thought I was in, a story of a woman wronged by a small town, was a lie. This was something so much bigger, so much more dangerous. My framing, my exile. It was never about Marcus Wade's bruised ego. It was a cover-up for treason and murder. And now I was the only living witness. The truth changes everything. One minute, I was a victim. The next, I was a witness. One minute, Nahuel was a hired killer turned reluctant savior. The next, he was a man hunting the ghosts of his past. And Harold Wade wasn't just a corrupt town boss. He was a war profiteer, arming the very people who were terrorizing the territory. The raids, the deaths, the fear that held Copper Ridge in its grip. Wade wasn't trying to stop it. He was fueling it. For profit. The coiled snake, Nahuel said, his voice tight with a rage that seemed to make the air around him vibrate. They are Chiricahua who were cast out. They follow a man named Kale. He raids both Apache and white settlements. He takes no prisoners. He burns everything he cannot carry. He stared off into the distance, but I knew he wasn't seeing the desert landscape. He was seeing smoke and fire and faces he would never see again. They came to our village at dawn, he said, his voice hollow. They were armed with new rifles. We were not. My father, my sister, they died because men like Harold Wade value gold more than human lives. Suddenly the choice he had given me, run to California or go back, wasn't a choice at all. How could I run, knowing what I knew? How could I start a new life, built on the silence that allowed men like Wade to thrive? Teach me, I said, the words surprising me with their intensity. Noel looked at me, his eyes snapping back to the present. Teach you what? To survive, I said. To be useful. I can't be helpless anymore. I won't be. If we're going to do this, if we're going to expose him, I need to be more than just a witness. I need to be a partner. He studied my face for a long time, searching for something. Maybe he saw the fear, but he must have seen the resolve underneath it too. The same stubborn anger that had kept me from breaking in that jail cell. It's not an easy path, he warned. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither does a man like Harold Wade, I countered. A flicker of that rare, humorless smile returned. Tomorrow, then, we start with water. And so began my education. The desert became my schoolhouse, and Nahuel my teacher. He taught me how to find water, how to read the tracks of animals, how to know which plants would feed you and which would kill you. He taught me how to be silent, how to move without being seen, how to listen to the language of the wind. My hands, once soft from holding books, grew calloused. My skin darkened under the sun. The woman who had arrived in Copper Ridge with a heart full of hope was being stripped away, piece by piece, replaced by someone harder, leaner, and infinitely more dangerous. We traveled for days, moving through the harsh, beautiful landscape. Nahuel spoke little of his past, but I learned it in pieces. I learned about the mission school where priests had tried to scrub the Apache from his soul, teaching him English and Latin, but leaving him stranded between two worlds. Too civilized for his people, too savage for the whites. He had created the legend of the Blood Hunter as a shield, a way to survive in a world that had no place for a man like him. Fear was his armor, and I understood. I, too, had been forced into a role I hadn't chosen. The spinster, the thief, the victim. Perhaps we weren't so different, this warrior and I. On the fifth morning, everything changed. Noel was teaching me how to track a coyote when his horse, a magnificent paint mare named Ayana, suddenly lifted her head, her ears pricked forward. Noel went still, his hand dropping to the hilt of the knife on his belt. "What is it?" I whispered. "Listen," he commanded. I strained my ears. At first, nothing but the wind. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the vast emptiness of the desert. A thin, high-pitched sound that made my blood run cold. A child crying. Instinctively, I started moving toward the sound. But Noel's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "No," he said, his voice flat. "There are children," I insisted, my teacher's instincts flaring to life. "They're in trouble." "This is not our fight," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It could be a trap. It could be renegades. It could be anything." The crying came again, weaker this time, desperate. "I spent my life protecting children, Nahuel," I said, my voice shaking with an emotion I hadn't felt in months. "I'm not going to stop now." "You will stop because it is suicide," he hissed. "Then I'll die," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But I will not walk away and let a child suffer. I can't." We stood there locked in a battle of wills, his survival instinct against my moral imperative. For a long moment, I thought he would force me to leave. I saw the cold, hard logic warring with something else in his eyes. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he let go of my arm. "If we do this," he said, his voice grim, "we do it my way. You do exactly as I say. No questions." He wasn't just agreeing to help. He was agreeing to risk everything, his life, our mission, for a stranger's child. And that's when I knew. He wasn't the monster they'd named him. He wasn't just a survivor. Beneath the armor of fear and legend, there was a man who understood honor in a way the people of Copper Ridge never could. We found them less than a mile away. A small homestead, or what was left of it. The cabin was a smoldering ruin. Bodies lay scattered in the yard. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and death. "Kyle's work," Nahuel said, his jaw tight as he studied the tracks in the dirt. The coiled snake, they were here. The crying was coming from a root cellar, its door blasted partially open. Nahuel called out, first in Apache, then in English. A tiny voice answered, Mama said not to come out no matter what. We found 3 of them huddled in the dark. A girl, Emma, maybe 8 years old. Her brother Billy, a little older, was unconscious with angry red burns on his arms and face, and a baby, Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 2. Their mother had hidden them, then faced the raiders alone. She had bought their lives with her own. He needs a doctor, I said, my voice choking as I looked at the boy's still form. Those burns are bad. Nahuel examined him with surprising gentleness. Smoke inhalation, too. He won't last long out here. The nearest help is Fort Bowie. 20 miles. A full day's journey if we push hard. 20 miles. Through hostile territory. With 3 children, one of them gravely injured. It was impossible. We can't carry them all, I said, despair washing over me. We can try, Nahuel replied, his mind already working. He fashioned a makeshift stretcher for Billy, which he secured to Ayana's saddle. The baby could ride in front of him. Emma would have to walk. As he worked, I moved through the wreckage of the cabin, looking for anything we could use. Water, food, bandages. My eyes fell on the body of a man near the barn. He must have been the father. He was one of Cale's men, I realized with a jolt. A renegade. He had a coiled snake tattoo on his arm. But something else caught my eye. Tucked into his belt was a small leather-bound ledger. My hand trembled as I picked it up. I opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and numbers. But it wasn't the numbers that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the names. Page after page listed deliveries, rifles, ammunition, dynamite. And next to each entry was the point of sale, Copper Ridge, and the signature at the bottom of each page, authorizing the payments, was crisp, clear, and unmistakable. H. Wade. My God. This wasn't just a side business for Wade. He was the renegade's primary arms dealer. He was supplying a full-blown insurrection. The ledger in my hands was the proof. It was the key to destroying him. But as I flipped to the last page, my blood ran cold. There was a recent entry, dated just 2 days ago. It detailed a large shipment of rifles and a final massive payment, and next to it, a handwritten note. Final delivery complete, all accounts settled. Tie up the loose end from the homestead, then proceed to the canyon pass as discussed. The teacher is no longer a problem. They weren't just renegades. The man lying dead at my feet, he was one of Wade's partners. And the raid on this homestead wasn't random. It was a business transaction gone wrong. A double cross. Wade was cleaning house, and he had sent Cale's war party somewhere else. A canyon pass. A cold dread washed over me as I realized the horrifying truth. Wade's plan was a masterpiece of evil. He'd hired Noel to kill me. He'd hired Cale to start a war. And he had set them both on a collision course. Nahuel, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We have to go. Now. I showed him the ledger. He read the last entry, and his face became a mask of stone. The Canyon Pass, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's the route to Fort Bowie. It wasn't a double cross, it was a trap. Wade had sent the renegades to the fort, knowing we'd be heading there with the children. He was using us as bait. He was going to let Cale's men wipe out the cavalry patrol, then pin the whole massacre on the legendary Blood Hunter. He wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. He was trying to start a war. And we were walking right into the middle of it. The race to Fort Bowie was a descent into hell. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a war cry. We had the evidence to burn Harold Wade to the ground, but it was worthless if we were dead. Billy's condition was getting worse. His breathing was shallow, his skin hot with fever. Baby Sarah wailed with a strength that belied her tiny size, her cries echoing in the vast, unforgiving silence. Emma, bless her heart, walked beside me for hours, her small face set with a grim determination that no 8-year-old should ever have to possess. Nahuel was a machine. He never seemed to tire, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his ears attuned to every sound. He was carrying the weight of our survival on his shoulders, and I could see the toll it was taking. He was pushing Ayana, his beloved horse, to her limit. "He's playing all sides against each other," Nahuel said during a brief stop to water the horses. "He sells guns to Kyle. He uses Kale's raids to stoke fear in the settlers. That fear makes them desperate, makes them agree to give him mining rights, land rights, anything for the illusion of safety. And he uses you, the Blood Hunter, as the perfect scapegoat," I finished, the bitter taste of Wade's treachery filling my mouth. "If Kale's men attack the fort, and you're found among the dead, the army will declare all-out war on the Apache. Wade gets his war, his profits, and all his enemies are eliminated in one fell swoop." It was diabolical, and we were the pawns in his deadly game. Emma finally stumbled, her small legs giving out. Without a word, Nahuel lifted her onto Ayana's back. The mare was now carrying 2 children and a stretcher. She was a hero in her own right. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in bloody shades of orange and red, Emma pointed a trembling finger. "Dust," she whispered. "A dust cloud. To the east. Riders. Coming fast." "Cavalry patrol," Nahuel said, his voice grim. "Right on schedule." He guided us into a rocky outcropping, a sliver of concealment in the wide-open terrain. "This is the moment of truth," he said. "Wade will have paid someone in that patrol. A captain, a sergeant, someone to make sure the story gets told his way." "So we can't trust them," I said. "We can't trust anyone," he corrected. The soldiers thundered past, 6 of them. Their leader, a captain with a thick mustache, rode at the front. They were heading directly for the canyon pass, directly into Kale's ambush. "We have to warn them," I said. "If we show ourselves, Wade's man will shoot us on sight," Nahuel countered. "He'll claim the Blood Hunter attacked them. The ledger will be lost. The truth will die with us." He was right. We were trapped. If we did nothing, the soldiers would ride to their deaths. If we tried to help, we would likely die with them. Billy let out a low moan, his body convulsing with fever. "He doesn't have much time," I said, my voice thick with desperation. "We have to get to the fort." "There is one way," Nahuel said slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant canyon. "But it is a fool's gambit." "I'm listening," I said. "Wade expects me to be the villain," he said. "He expects the Blood Hunter. So we give him something else." He looked at me. "We give him the school teacher." He explained the plan. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the only chance we had. He handed me the ledger. "Guard this with your life," he said. Then he took a deep breath. He let out a call, a high-pitched cry of a hawk that echoed through the rocks. It was a sound I had heard him make before, when he was tracking game. But this time it wasn't for an animal. Far ahead, the cavalry patrol slowed, their heads turning toward the sound. Noel gave me one last look. "Do not hesitate, Cassandra," he said, "no matter what you see." Then he did the last thing I ever expected. He spurred Ayana out from the rocks and rode directly toward the soldiers, whooping and yelling, his rifle held high in the air. He was playing the part. He was becoming the monster from the stories. The soldiers immediately drew their weapons. The captain shouted orders. "It's him! It's the Blood Hunter! Fire!" Rifle shots cracked through the air. Nawel weaved Ayana through the sagebrush, a moving target, drawing their fire, pulling their attention away from the canyon pass, away from us. It was my cue. Clutching the ledger, with Emma holding tight to my hand and me carrying Sarah in my other arm, I ran. I ran from our hiding place in the opposite direction, toward a high ridge that overlooked the canyon. It was a desperate, agonizing scramble over rocks and thorns, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. Below me, the scene was chaos. Nahuel was a phantom, appearing and disappearing behind rocks, drawing the soldiers further and further into the open plain. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, but I could see the trap. Hiding among the rocks at the mouth of the canyon, I could see the glint of rifle barrels. Kyle's men, at least 24 of them. Waiting. The soldiers were completely oblivious, their focus entirely on the singular threat of the Blood Hunter. I reached the top of the ridge. I had to create a diversion, something big enough to make the soldiers stop, to make them look away from Nahuel and see the real danger. My eyes landed on a pile of dry brush in a dead lightning-scarred tree at the edge of the ridge, directly above the canyon entrance. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in my mind. Fire. I had no matches, but Nahwal had taught me. He had shown me how to use a piece of flint and steel, a skill I had practiced over and over until my knuckles were raw. My hands trembled as I fumbled in my pocket for the small kit he had insisted I carry. Sparks flew, one caught in the tinder-dry grass I had gathered, a tiny wisp of smoke. I blew on it gently, coaxing it, praying. A small flame flickered to life. I thrust it into the pile of brush. It caught instantly, roaring to life with a terrifying speed. The flames licked at the dead tree, climbing its trunk like a hungry beast. The fire spread along the ridge, creating a wall of smoke and flame directly above the ambush site. Down below, everything stopped. The renegades, their ambush exposed, were thrown into confusion. The soldiers, seeing the fire and the figures moving in the rocks below, finally realized they had been led into a trap. The captain screamed, "Ambush! Fall back!" But it was too late. Kyle's men opened fire. The battle was instant and brutal, and in that chaos, Nahuel, his diversion complete, slipped away, vanishing back into the desert landscape as if he were never there. I had done it. I had saved the soldiers. I had exposed the trap. But as I watched the firefight rage below, a new horror dawned on me. I was now stranded on a burning ridge, with two small children, miles from the fort, with a war party of murderous renegades just below me. And somewhere in the smoke and chaos, so was Noel. We had survived the trap, but we had just stepped into the fire. The world became a nightmare of smoke, ash, and the deafening crack of rifle fire. The ridge was an inferno. I grabbed the children, shielding their faces from the heat, and scrambled down the far side, away from the battle, away from the flames. Every step was a gamble on loose rock and treacherous footing. We tumbled to the bottom in a heap of dust and tears. Emma was terrified but silent, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah was screaming, her small body trembling. I held them close, my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sounds of the battle were muffled now, but still terrifyingly close. Who was winning? Did it even matter? Whoever won would surely come looking for the source of the fire. We had to move. We had to find Nahwal. "This way," a voice hissed from the darkness. Nahwal. He emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his face grim, streaked with soot. He had Ayana with him. The brave mare was trembling, her eyes wide, but she was unharmed. "Billy," I gasped, looking at the empty stretcher on her back. "Where's Billy?" "He's safe," Nahwal said, his voice low and urgent. "And so are the soldiers. For now." My mind couldn't comprehend it. What happened? How? "While you were setting your fire, I circled around," he explained quickly. "One of the soldiers was the one Wade paid off. A corporal. I saw him trying to shoot the captain in the back during the confusion. I stopped him. He had single-handedly prevented the ambush and rooted out the traitor. The captain owes me his life," Nahuel continued. "He understands now. He took Billy and is making a run for the fort with the rest of his men. He's going to tell the colonel the truth. He's going to use the boy as proof." Relief washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. Billy was safe. The truth was on its way to Fort Bowie. "But Cale's men are between them and the fort," I said. "And they are also between us and the fort," Nahuel finished grimly. "The captain created a diversion to draw the main force away. But Cale is no fool. He will have sent scouts. The desert is crawling with them. We can't get through." "So what do we do?" I asked, looking at the two exhausted children. "We can't stay here." "No," Nahuel said, his eyes scanning the dark landscape. "We don't go to the fort. We go somewhere they will never expect." He looked at me, and I saw the desperate, brilliant gleam of a new plan in his eyes. "We go back," he said. "Back?" I whispered, horrified. "Back to Copper Ridge?" "Think, Cassandra," he urged. "Wade thinks we are dead or trapped in the desert. He thinks his plan is working. Cale's men are focused on the fort. The cavalry is in disarray. Copper Ridge is the one place no one is looking. It's the last place Wade would ever expect us to be. It was insane, walking back into the Viper's nest. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the terrifying logic. It was the ultimate gambit. We can't fight Kale's entire war party, Nahwal said. We can't fight the army if they decide the Blood Hunter is to blame. But we can fight one man. We can cut the head off the snake. The ledger was still tucked safely in my dress. The proof. We have to get that ledger to someone who will use it, I said. Someone in a position of authority. Not someone in the fort, Nahwal said. Wade might have paid off more than one soldier. We need someone Wade can't control. Someone he fears. And then I knew. There was only one person in Copper Ridge who had stood up to Harold Wade, even in a small way. The one person who had called his plan to sacrifice me a murder. Dr. Franklin, I said. Nahwal nodded. He's our only chance. The journey back was a phantom trek through a haunted land. We traveled by night, hiding during the day, moving like ghosts through the dry washes and rocky canyons. Nahwal's skills were all that kept us alive. He found water where there was none. He moved us through the landscape without leaving a track. The children were incredible. Emma became my little shadow, helping to keep Sarah quiet, her small face a mask of fierce concentration. They understood, in the way that children do, that our lives depended on silence. 2 nights later, we stood on a hill overlooking the sleeping town of Copper Ridge. The faint glow of lanterns seemed alien, a world away from the harsh reality of the desert. The town that had cast me out now represented our only hope for justice. Getting in was the easy part. Nahwal knew the town's rhythms, the blind spots in the sheriff's lazy patrols. We slipped through the back alleys, the same alleys I had been paraded through on my way to Devil's Canyon. The irony was not lost on me. Dr. Franklin's house was dark. Nahwal scouted it first, moving with a silence that was supernatural. He returned a few minutes later. He's alone. A light is on in his study at the back of the house. Leaving the children hidden in a deserted shed with Ayana, we crept through the doctor's backyard. I could see him through the window, slumped over his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a portrait of despair. My heart pounded as I tapped gently on the window pane. He looked up, startled. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw me. He thought he was seeing a ghost. He stumbled to the window and threw it open. "Miss Mitchell?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "My God. We thought. They said the Apache saved my life, Doctor," I said quietly. "And now we need your help." We slipped inside. In the dim lamplight of his study, I told him everything. I showed him the ledger. As he read, his face went from shock to disbelief to a cold, righteous fury. "That monster," he breathed, looking at Wade's signature. "He's been profiting from this all along. The raids, the deaths. He manufactured it all. He framed me to keep me quiet," I said. "And he hired Nahwal to kill me. He set a trap for the cavalry at the Canyon Pass. He's trying to start a full-scale war." The doctor paced the room, his mind racing. "We have to get this to the army, to Colonel Patterson at the fort." "We can't," Nahwal said, speaking for the first time. "Wade has men on his payroll. We don't know who to trust. The ledger could be lost, and we could be shot resisting arrest." "Then what do we do?" the doctor asked, looking from me to Nahwal. "Wade owns this town. He owns the sheriff. We are 3 people against his entire empire." "Not 3, I said, a new audacious plan forming in my mind. A plan so daring it just might work. "The people of this town are not evil, Doctor. They are afraid. Wade rules them through fear. Fear of the Apache, fear of poverty, fear of him." I looked at the ledger in the doctor's hand. "What if we took away the fear?" I asked. "What if we showed them the truth?" The doctor looked at me confused. "How?" "Sunday morning," I said, my voice steady. "Everyone in Copper Ridge will be in one place. A place where even Harold Wade wouldn't dare start a gunfight." Dr. Franklin's eyes widened as he understood. "The church," he whispered. "We're not going to run to the authorities," I said, feeling a fire I hadn't felt in years ignite within me. "We're going to bring the authority to us. We're going to hold a trial, and the whole town is going to be the jury." It was the most dangerous idea I'd ever had. We would be walking into the heart of the enemy's territory, unarmed, relying on nothing but the power of the truth. But as I looked at Nahuel's steady gaze and the doctor's determined face, I knew it was the only way. The dust in Copper Ridge had yet to settle. But on Sunday morning, we were going to start a storm. The next 2 days were a blur of whispered plans and silent preparations. Dr. Franklin, bless his courageous heart, proved to be an invaluable ally. He hid us in his cellar, bringing us food and news from the town. The official story, spun by Harold Wade, was that the Blood Hunter had ambushed a cavalry patrol. The soldiers had fought bravely, but were now pinned down near Fort Bowie. Wade had organized a posse of concerned citizens to ride out and help. It was a lie, of course. The posse was made up of Wade's hired guns. Their real mission was to make sure no soldiers from that patrol made it back to the fort alive. He was tying up his loose ends. He felt safe. He felt untouchable. He had no idea the ghosts he'd tried to bury were hiding right under his nose. Our plan was simple, and that's what made it so terrifying. On Sunday morning, while Wade and the rest of the town were in church, Dr. Franklin would stand up and interrupt the sermon. He would tell them a terrible crime had been committed. He would tell them there was a witness. That would be my cue. I would walk into that church, and I would tell them everything. Nahuel's role was the most dangerous. He would not be in the church. He would be our insurance policy. He would be positioned in the bell tower across the street, armed with a rifle the doctor had kept hidden. He would not be there to start a fight, but to end one if Wade's men tried to silence me by force. He was the guardian angel I never knew I needed. The children were the wild card. We couldn't leave them alone, and we couldn't take them with us. Dr. Franklin arranged for them to stay with the minister's wife, a kind woman who knew only that they were orphans from a raid and needed care. It was a risk, but one we had to take. Saturday night, as we made our final preparations, a strange quiet fell between me and Nahuel. We were standing in the doctor's dark garden, the scent of night-blooming jasmine hanging in the air. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "You could take Ayana and ride away. You've done more than enough." He looked at the town, at the faint lights in the windows. "When my family was killed," he said, his voice low, "I made a vow, not for revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything. I made a vow for justice, for a world where men like Wade do not hold all the power." He turned to me, and in the dim starlight, I could see the truth in his eyes. "This is not your fight anymore, Cassandra. It is ours." In that moment, he was not the blood hunter, and I was not the disgraced schoolteacher. We were two survivors, two outcasts, who had found a common cause in the most unlikely of circumstances. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. The church bell began to ring, calling the faithful to worship. It was a sound that had once brought me comfort. Now it sounded like a countdown to my own execution. I watched from the doctor's window as the people of Copper Ridge filed into the church. Mrs. Porter in her finest bonnet, Mayor Richards looking important and self-satisfied, and then Harold Wade with his son Marcus at his side. They walked like kings, accepting the deferential nods of the townsfolk. My heart pounded against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. Dr. Franklin placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Courage, Miss Mitchell," he said. "The truth is a powerful weapon." I took a deep breath. I thought of the children. I thought of Nahuel's family. I thought of the man waiting for me in the bell tower, trusting me to do my part. The last of the townspeople entered the church. The doors swung shut. It was time. I walked out of the doctor's house and into the morning sun. The street was empty. The world seemed to be holding its breath. I crossed the dusty street, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I didn't look at the bell tower. I knew he was there. I reached the tall wooden doors of the church. I could hear the minister's voice droning on inside. I placed my hand on the cold iron handle. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Every head turned. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. They were looking at a ghost. The woman they had sent into the desert to die was standing in the doorway of their sanctuary. The minister faltered, his sermon dying on his lips. Harold Wade shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed. "The meaning," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent church, is that you are a liar, a traitor, and a murderer, and your reign of fear is over. I held up the ledger. I have proof. The church erupted. Wade's face went from red to a pasty white. He looked at his son, Marcus, whose smug smirk had vanished, replaced by pure terror. "She's delirious," Wade shouted. "She's a criminal. Sheriff, arrest this woman." Sheriff Bradley, sitting in the back pew, looked torn. He started to rise, but then Dr. Franklin stepped forward, blocking his path. "She is under my protection, Sheriff," the doctor said, his voice ringing with newfound courage. "And I think we should all hear what she has to say." Wade's hired guns, scattered throughout the pews, started to move. Their hands went to the pistols hidden under their coats. And that's when it happened. A single gunshot rang out, not inside the church, but from outside. It was deafening in the silence. The stained glass window above the altar shattered, raining down a shower of colored glass. Everyone froze. Wade's men looked around, confused, terrified. They didn't know where the shot had come from, but I knew. It was Nahuel, a warning shot, a message. I am here. Do not move. The balance of power shifted in that instant. The fear that Wade had so carefully cultivated was now turned against him. His men were trapped. "As I was saying," I continued, my voice calm, "Harold Wade has been selling army rifles to the renegades who have been attacking our homes and killing our people." I began to read from the ledger. Names, dates, shipments. The evidence was undeniable. With every word, I could feel the mood in the church shifting. The whispers of the crowd turned from confusion to suspicion, from suspicion to a low, angry murmur. I told them about the homestead, about the children, about the trap Wade had set for the cavalry. When I was finished, a terrible silence descended upon the church. Every eye was on Harold Wade. "Lie!" he shrieked, his composure finally shattering. "All of it. The ravings of a madwoman." He turned to his son. "Marcus, tell them what she did to you." But Marcus Wade was a boy, not a man, and under the weight of 100 accusing stares, he broke. "She didn't do anything," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "It was a lie. Father made me do it. He said she saw something. He said she had to be silenced." It was over. The final piece had fallen into place. Harold Wade stood there, exposed, his empire of lies crumbling around him. The crowd, the same people who had crossed the street to avoid me, began to rise to their feet. Their fear had finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard rage. They started to move toward him, a slow, menacing wave of righteous fury. Sheriff Bradley, no longer a coward, drew his pistol. "Harold Wade," he said, his voice firm for the first time in years, "you are under arrest." Justice had come to Copper Ridge, not by a lawman or a soldier, but by a disgraced school teacher, a courageous doctor, and a warrior they had called a monster. The dust finally settled in Copper Ridge, but it was a different kind of dust. It was the dust of old lies being swept away, of a town beginning to build something new from the ruins of its own fear. Harold Wade's trial was swift. With the ledger, Marcus's confession, and the testimony of the surviving soldiers from the cavalry patrol, who had been rescued by Colonel Patterson and a relief force, his guilt was undeniable. The posse he'd sent out was captured, and they confessed to everything. Wade's web of deceit unraveled completely. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. The town treated me like a hero, which was almost as uncomfortable as being treated like a villain. They offered me my old job back at the schoolhouse, with a raise and a public apology. But I had changed. The desert had changed me. I couldn't go back to teaching poetry and arithmetic as if nothing had happened. Nahuel was a more complicated matter. He was no longer the feared blood hunter. To the army, he was a key witness and an unlikely ally. To the people of Copper Ridge, he was a quiet, enigmatic figure who had saved them from a tyrant. But he was still a man without a people, caught between two worlds. A few weeks after the trial, he found me sitting on the porch of my new home. The doctor had insisted I take it, watching the sunset. The three children, Emma, Billy, and Sarah, were playing in the yard. The town had opened its heart to them, and several families were vying for the chance to adopt them. I've been thinking, I said as he sat down beside me, about all these children. The ones here, the ones at the fort, the ones from your old village. They're all growing up in a world that teaches them to hate and fear each other. Noel nodded, watching the children play. What if, I continued, the idea taking shape even as I spoke it, what if there was a place where they could learn something different? A school, not just for white children or Apache children, for all of them. A place where they could learn that what's in a person's heart's more important than the color of their skin. I looked at him. It would need a special kind of teacher, one who understands both worlds. A slow smile, a genuine one this time, spread across his face. And it would need a protector, he said, someone to keep it safe for men like Wade. Someone who knows how to fight in the shadows. He looked at me, his dark eyes full of a future I had never dared to imagine. Where would this school be? I smiled back. I know a valley, about 50 miles north of here. Good water, protected from the worst of the weather. It was a dangerous idea, a radical dream in a world built on division and hate. It would be hard. There would be people on both sides who would want us to fail. But as I looked at Nahuel and at the children who represented our future, I knew we had to try. Our journey together had started in the dust of Devil's Canyon, a journey born of lies and a death sentence. But it had led us here, to a place of hope, to a new beginning. The world is full of monsters, but they're not always the ones the stories warn you about. Sometimes they're the ones sitting beside you in church, and sometimes the person who saves you is the one everyone else has thrown away. If you believe that courage can be found in the most unexpected places and that the truth is always worth fighting for, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss another story.